Introducing myself. Thanks. Hanna Belaine. I'm Policy and Advocacy Officer at Results Canada. I would like to start our discussion today by paying respect to the Algonquin people, who are the traditional guardians of the land where the Office of Results Canada is in Ottawa. We at Results acknowledge their long-standing relationship with this territory, which remains unceded. The Algonquin peoples have lived on this land since time immemorial, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to be present in this territory today. I'm glad to see so many of you join this call today. And as I go through logistics next, say hello and tell others where you're located in the chat box. So one thing to note is that the session is really a dialogue about taking action to end the malnutrition crisis. So please feel free to engage. Feel free to use the chat box and to, it's conversation to social media. We'll be sharing the Twitter handles of our speakers in the chat, as well as hashtags that you can use. So yeah, so that being said, though, please stay muted unless you're posing a question or participating. And then for the best experience, while our speakers are participating, you can put your Zoom view with speaker mode. You can just toggle at the right of the screen and click to test out toggling between gallery and speaker mode. And then please also note that the session, as you've seen now, is being recorded. And if you're comfortable doing so, feel free to turn on your video. So, as you know, we're currently living through an unparalleled malnutrition crisis. And earlier this month, we kicked off our Invest in Nutrition campaign to call on Canada to invest in nutrition, right? Like an additional $330 million over 5 years at the Nutrition for Growth Summit. And then from this amount, from the $330 million, we're asking that $150 million be directed to the Global Financing Facility for Women, Children, and Adolescents, because we know that they're well positioned to implement that funding for maximum impact. So tonight, we're joined by 4 amazing speakers, amazing colleagues. We have Aurélie Sonda, who's the program officer at Waki Health. Waki Health, as you may know, is an African regional advocacy organization. And Aurélie works with civil society organizations to implement a campaign called the GFF We Want campaign, which aims to leverage the knowledge and the capacity of the civil society coalitions working on the GFF to advocate for better GFF resource mobilization results and objectives for their respective communities. Cecilia Fabrizio is also joining us from the Standing Together for Nutrition Consortium. Cecilia is the program lead for the consortium, and this is a consortium which was formed in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and is a unique collaboration of over 50 leading experts, in the areas of nutrition, economics, health, representing more than 35 organizations from around the world. So we're really excited to have you with us, Cecilia. And then finally, we have with us Ramina Gassemi, who is the International Advocacy Specialist at UNICEF Canada. And in her role, Ramina advocates for the right of every child to keep them protected, healthy, and educated, and to give them a fair chance to fulfill their potential. So to start our discussion, Cecilia, can you maybe give us an overview of the malnutrition crisis? What is the scale of this malnutrition crisis? How is the pandemic driving it? What are the projections? And what can we do to reverse this malnutrition crisis? So over to you, Cecilia.
Sure, thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. Can you see the slides?
Yes.
Great. So thank you, Hannah, for the introduction. And I appreciate the chance to speak and share the work on the scale and the impact of the pandemic in nutrition. Too many women and children are suffering from malnutrition, and COVID has made it dramatically worse. I want to highlight the impact of COVID on malnutrition and what we can do to reverse it. Many people, especially women and children in lower and middle income countries, are really struggling with malnutrition. There's 2 serious kinds of malnutrition. One is stunting, one is wasting. So children who suffer from stunting, from malnutrition over time, they become stunted, which means they're short for their height. And this chronic malnutrition can cause severe irreversible damage to their health and their developing brain. Wasting then refers to a child who's too thin for her or his height, and it's a result of rapid weight loss or the failure to gain weight. When a child is moderately or severely wasted, they'll have an increased risk of death. So before the pandemic, 22% of children under 5 were already stunted. So they had chronic malnutrition. So 150 million children. And almost 7% of children globally, 45 million, were wasted. So severe malnutrition. And 30% of women of childbearing age are anemic. So the consequences of stunting in particular are irreversible. So they're lifelong. As a child, they'll have poor health. They could have poor immune response, and they may not reach their potential. And then as an adult, this person may be smaller than others. They may not do as well as school. They may not realize their potential in their working life, and so they may earn less money. And they will be at greater risk of diabetes or cancer, and so at risk of an early death. So this was the situation before COVID. So we all know about the terrible impact of the COVID pandemic and how the devastating loss of life have been simply unprecedented. But we're now increasingly concerned on the lasting multi-generational effects of the pandemic on nutrition, particularly for millions of vulnerable women and children. When you think about the secondary impacts of the pandemic, which aren't discussed as much. So we know that economically, we saw an extraordinary loss of jobs and family income. Food systems, so the supply chain that brings food from the farm to you was affected, especially by the lockdowns, and more difficult for people to access or to afford healthy and nutritious food. And then health services were disrupted. So when lockdowns happened or healthcare workers in hospitals had to focus on COVID, then other people couldn't get the healthcare they need. It could have been when they're pregnant, or the child is severely malnourished, or just routine vaccinations. So when COVID hit and the scientific and academic community realized that the pandemic might reverse 10 years of progress in reducing global malnutrition, we brought together some of the world's leading experts in food, health, nutrition, and economics to model this possible impact of COVID-19 on women and children's nutrition from the combination of these three crises. We also wanted to make sure that this analysis and estimate was meaningful to policymakers. So we calculated the cost of these malnutrition crises in lost productivity in dollars. Now, our modeling was done first relatively early in the pandemic. So you see 3 scenarios here. But unfortunately, the pandemic continues to rage, especially in low and middle income countries that haven't had access to the vaccine. So tragically, the impact could be this worst case here on the right. Let me show you the numbers. We've estimated that 3.6 million additional children will be stunted, so they'll have that lifelong effect of chronic malnutrition. We estimate that an additional 13.6 million children will suffer from wasting. So that's that rapid weight loss that has life-threatening implications. And then when you put the impact of those children's weakened immune systems together, the research projects this could lead to an additional 283,000 additional malnutrition-related deaths in children under 5 over 3 years. Or another way to say it is, that's sadly equivalent to 250 children dying per day. These high rates of malnutrition will undermine under COVID recovery, particularly in countries that already had high levels of malnutrition, and it can impair their immune systems and possibly also their response to vaccinations. We also estimated if you take this group of children who were affected by COVID now, over time, throughout their lifetime, the additional loss in productivity could be $44 billion in future losses. Today, even though it's almost the end of 2021, we still don't have real-time data on what's happening in malnutrition in many countries because they haven't been able to go out and collect the data in person. But we do know that what's driving these crises, and we have data on it. First, we know that malnutrition is increasing because poverty is increasing. We know COVID has pushed an additional 150 million people into extreme poverty, These people are suffering from food insecurity and hunger. Second, malnutrition is increasing because food is becoming less accessible or less affordable. The food supply chain has been broken. Food is more expensive. So we estimate an additional 141 million people can't afford nutritious food. So that's food that's rich in micronutrients, like you get from fruit, vegetables, or animal source foods. Third, malnutrition is increasing because of disruptions in access to healthcare. We know that countries had to reduce their healthcare services, particularly nutrition-related services, by an average of 30 or 50%. So women and children couldn't get access to these proven interventions. So the situation is grim, and we know that the implications for child and maternal undernutrition, especially wasting, will be severe. What can we do together to reverse the crises? COVID is a risk and an opportunity. We know that we can make investments in proven interventions, simple, ready to scale, and these should be part of COVID response plans. A recent Lancet series calls them the Samurai Solutions. Second, we must invest in maternal and child nutrition throughout the life cycle, pregnancy, infancy, early childhood. And most importantly, when crises like this hits, like the pandemic, conflict, climate change, we must build resilient systems so where nutrition is integrated into health, food, and social protection. Does it work? Advocacy, we know advocacy is strengthened by evidence. Standing Together has been working and partnering with organizations like Results Canada to amplify these messages. We ask you to, with your help, stand together with us. Stand together for nutrition. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cecilia, for this very engaging overview. I think you've highlighted very well just how alarming the scale of this crisis is. And just before we move on to Aurélie and to some of the solutions you already touched on a bit, I wanted to welcome Oyeyemi Pitan, who's just joining us all the way from Nigeria. Thank you, Oyeyemi, for bringing your voice to this discussion. I know it's very, very late for you in Abuja. Oyeyemi is a youth advocate.
Thank you for me.
Yes, we're very happy to have you with us. Thank you. So I was just saying that you are a youth advocate on reproductive, maternal, newborn, child, adolescent health, and nutrition. Oyeyemi is the youth focal person for the GFF CSO coordinating group in Nigeria, and she's been really at the forefront of advocacy for increased and efficient utilization of funding for health and nutrition in Nigeria. So we're going to be hearing from her in a little while, but I wanted to give the floor to Aurélie. And, you work for Waki Health, an organization, an advocacy organization in Africa. What would you say are the urgent actions that must be taken to reverse this malnutrition crisis? And then in particular, Waki Health has this GFF We Want campaign that you're leading. So can you elaborate a little bit on how the GFF can be part of the solution?
Yes, thank you, Anna, and thank you everyone for having me. Cecilia did touch a bit on some of the solutions, but I would say that the first thing is to raise awareness on the crisis and the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on nutrition. So as Cecilia said, the pandemic resulted in a series of disruption of provision of essential health services, so including services that promoted nutrition. And, some resource mapping in some countries, they even show that funds for essential health services were disrupted and reprogrammed towards the COVID-19 response. And with the lockdowns, like Cecilia said, some people lost their jobs, their access to food. Some children only have access to food via some food for education program, but they have to go to school to have access to that food. And so with the lockdowns, they don't have access to the food anymore. Raising awareness to the existence of a growing secondary crisis, like Cecilia rightly said, is a first step here, because once people know, then they get to mobilize themselves and try to help. There was I'm talking from the US, and there was a program on the news last day about the malnutrition situation in Madagascar. And right after the program, so many people were so touched that they contributed funds to the World Hunger Organization. So it's important to bring, first of all, awareness on that. Secondly, I think aiming at containing the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic is important. So we need to learn from what our current situation is now and plan for future emergency disaster preparedness while redirecting the funds to ensure that access to essential services are not disrupted. Collaborating with civil society organizations to facilitate, advocacy. Advocacy is very important, like Cecilia said, for domestic and international resource mobilization for nutrition. And, collaborating with civil society organizations also facilitate local monitoring and accountability when it comes to the use of funds that are mobilized. The other point I will mention would be like to focus on women. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, women make up about 45% of the agricultural labor force in developing countries. Yet these women, they are not treated the same as their male counterpart. They routinely face more extreme poverty, less education, they compete for priorities, they have less access to some things like control over the land they are working on. So closing or trying to close the gap, the gender gap, can help women be empowered to find ways of feeding their families. And finally, but not least, is to invest in financing mechanisms like the GFF. And just to give a brief introduction to the GFF, as you know, is the global financing facility that was established in 2015 as an innovative financial mechanism to support low and middle income countries to accelerate progress on reproductive, maternal, newborn child, adolescent health, and nutrition. So what the GFF does is to facilitate the creation of government-led multi-stakeholders platforms in GFF countries. And those platforms, they develop and implement a national health plan or an investment case. They call it investment case to promote health and nutrition. So they facilitate government putting together a platform with civil society organization, private sector, donors, and together come up with a plan that fits their realities on the ground. And once the plan is approved, the GFF raise some funds or provide funds, sometimes from domestic resources, international donors like Canada, for instance, or many other sources, the World Bank, for instance, to help implement such investment cases. So to me, I think those are the main strategies we can adopt.
Thank you so much, Ohedi. To expand on some of the points that you made and the actions that we can take, I want to come to you, Oyeyemi. Maybe tell us a little bit more about yourself on, you're a young advocate for good nutrition. So what motivates you? And then what do you think are the key actions that can contribute to ending this malnutrition crisis from your perspective?
Okay, thank you so much, Hannah, for having me. So greetings from Nigeria, everyone. My name is Oyeyemi, as Riley introduced. I'm the youth focal person for the CSO coordinating group for GFF. And, before I go into what young people can do, how young people can actually add their voice and make difference in ending the malnutrition crisis globally, I would like to give a context in terms of what is happening in Nigeria. Nigeria has the second highest burden of stunted children in the world, with a national prevalence rate of 32% of children under 5. And an estimated 2 million children in Nigeria suffer from severe acute malnutrition, but only 2 out of every 10 children affected is currently reached with treatment. This statistics is from UNICEF. And that 7% of women of childbearing age also suffer from acute malnutrition. So UNICEF is one of the partners in Nigeria working to ensure that malnutrition is actually brought down to the minimum number. And so in Nigeria, there's actually an issue, and the context is the fact that in the northern part of Nigeria, they are mostly affected with 2 forms of malnutrition, stunting and wasting. I remember coming back from work today, and I was still thinking about this event. Then I parked to get fuel at the filling station, and a boy approached me. I actually thought he had autism because he was holding a bottle, which I perceived that he was inhaling something, probably a substance from. And then someone told me, because of course I was with one of my colleagues, who told me that my colleagues who happened to have, graduated from university said, since he was in secondary school, that's high school, he had always known this boy begging for alms and always inhaling something, and that he had not grown from that time till now. And that's a story of a stunted growth, because there's a little man being trapped in the body of a boy. And that's a case of several others in Nigeria. And so the challenge is actually a public health challenge for the country. Stunting, in addition to an increased risk of death, is also linked to poor cognitive development, a lowered performance in education, and low productivity in adulthood, all contributing to economic, and the implication is actually that it contributes to economic losses estimated to account for as much as 11% of GDP. And so, back to my work. Remember, I also want you to know that I'm the executive director at GEMOB Initiative, a nonprofit that is focused on supporting young people, adolescents especially, that's from 10 to 24 years old. And from our work, we see from the lens of the mental health, talking about the nutrition aspect of young people, talking about their sexual and reproductive health. We want to see all of this as it impacts their mental health. And so that is what we do in Nigeria. As the GFS focal point, I work with other young people. I remember that last week, we just even came up with a scorecard. And what we did with the scorecard was actually to look at the budget of Nigeria and see what funding looked like in terms of nutrition, as well as look at what funding looked like in terms of adolescents and young people's health. And we were able to, develop this scorecard, which we just designed. And, we're planning to approach the family department of the Federal Ministry of Health in Nigeria, so that we can take advocacy to them, and then open their minds to reason why there should be increase in budgetary allocation for young people's health, young people's nutrition, because there was no clear item on the budget that can be related, or that can be directed to young people, for you to say that this is young people, this is the amount marked for young people's nutrition in Nigeria. And so that's one of the things that I work on, development of scorecard. And even just yesterday in the morning, I remember that I already gave a background of what GFF is. That's the Global Financing Facility. Being the focal point in Nigeria, I'm also part of the resource mobilization team of the GFF We Want. And so one of the things we were able to do was to actually approach embassies of global North countries in Nigeria, as well as donors, to ensure that they make commitments into RMNCH plus N, which is the reproductive, maternal, newborn, child, adolescent health plus nutrition, because we know that nutrition is actually very, very, very important. It's an important issue to be addressed, the issue of malnutrition, coupled with the impact of COVID-19, and as well as insurgencies in Nigeria. Crises in some parts of Nigeria had actually increased the incidence of malnutrition. And so we actually had this meeting, a roundtable meeting with donor just yesterday, and we're able to analyze the importance of contributing to making commitments and making contribution towards the 2.5 billion target to mobilize resources for GFF before the end of 2025. And so these are one of the things we do. And for young people, I would say, and of course, a big appreciation, a big thank you to Canada, because Canada is one of the, greatest country governments, contributing to the GFF. And so, yeah, we were able to have this conversation, and then we have the EU on the table, EU delegation to Nigeria on the table. We have the High Commissioner of Canada on the table, and we had a robust discussion on how we can, mobilize resources, domestic resources, as well as even for donor, to ensure that more money is made available for nutrition in Nigeria. And so for young people, what can you do as a young person? So I'll just give an example of what I do as a young person. So as a young person, it's just for me to understand the issues and understand the context in my country. And that's what I know. What are the issues? Once you understand what the issues are, you have your statistics, you have your evidence, then identify who are the key players who can make change in your country. And then as well as collaborating with other CSOs and other young people, because you cannot do it all alone, you then go with this, with a loud voice of the CSOs and other young people, and then take advocacy to change makers, as well as also think about domestic resource mobilization, because that's actually the way to go in terms of sustainability, and speak to probably even private sectors in your country or globally, and then ensure that you take advocacy to the right persons who can make change happen. And so that's what I do in Nigeria, collaborating with other young people in different sectors, and taking advocacy to the right places, as well as remember I mentioned the scorecard that we developed. So we didn't just go and we're not talking on emotions. We took evidence based on financing, that based on the budgets, and it was very clear that there was not enough funding made available for nutrition. There was not enough funding made available for RMNCH, especially for adolescents. And then these were the evidences that we actually approached, the change makers with, and they listened to us, and then they made commitments that that will be done. Aside that, monitoring is also another thing. Ensuring accountability, following up on implementation of even the budgets to ensure that, the budget is actually, implemented appropriately. Monies are released on time, and then the monies being earmarked for that purpose is actually used for that purpose, because of course we understand the issues of misappropriation and in developing countries. So those are things young people can do. Add your voice, make that noise, but don't let it be just a noise. Make it like an evidence-based, noise, and then change will come. Thank you.
I love that, Oyeyemi. So make your noise, but make it evidence-based noise. I think it's a very nice quote to keep from tonight, and I'm sure our comms team is going to tweet it today or tomorrow. And thank you so much for sharing the context in Nigeria. You kind of illustrated really nicely what Cecilia was talking about stunting, and also the different tactics that you've been using with your colleagues in Nigeria. So, maybe let's now open it up a little bit for questions and comments. please feel free to raise your hand or to unmute yourself and speak, or to use the chat box to write down your questions and to engage with Amy, with O'Haley, with Cecilia, to share your thoughts and questions. And there's already one question here from Andrew for you, Oyemi. Does USAID provide funding to the GFF? Is there a US presence? I assume it's in Nigeria.
Yes, there's definitely US presence in Nigeria. They were also even on the table yesterday, the meeting I mentioned. So yes, US presence in Nigeria. And yes, I think USAID is also funding GFF. I hope I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
So maybe, till we wait for others to write their questions in the chat, maybe Cecilia and Oyemi, if you could talk a little bit about the impact of the pandemic on women. I know you touched on it a little bit, O'Haley, but if this is something you can highlight, that'd be great. Oh, and I see that Zainab has you have your hand up. You can go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, Olimi and Olga, everyone. Anna, how are you? How are things going? Yeah, Cecilia, I saw you. Yeah, I'm the co-founder CEO for Canada Sierra Leone Friendship Society, Inc., where we go like doing both in Winnipeg. I'm calling from Winnipeg, and in Sierra Leone as well. Calling for malnutrition is a big gap in the world for both Canada as well. Not only in global, but we too here, we are experiencing it. The example, while we are doing this, when this COVID-19 came in, like my hands are tied with malnutrition people, especially in the rural area. For Sierra Leone, the difficulties I find with our organization, which is registered, accountability, you have to do your tax, everything. But in the space of Sierra Leone, I don't know they have how many people that the organizations in Sierra Leone are fighting for this, but it doesn't go to the right people. It doesn't go to the right children. If you can remember the Ebola, it's because of children wants food, but they don't have it. They go to the bush. Some food they don't, they cannot eat some fruits, but they eat it, they got into. So as Canada calling results, this program, we don't know the question of how Canada can help. Are they going just focus in Africa, like specifically for Sierra Leone? Government corrupt, totally corrupt. You're not gonna reach, and the Canadian government, like me, I'm proud of being a Canadian, and I want everywhere I go, I'll be proud to say, oh, this is what Canada give. But we cannot give our taxes to give to a country where the people itself doesn't reach. So that's the reason we are finding very difficult for we little small organizations. They don't fund us, they fund bigger organizations, and the bigger organization doesn't reach to the people. How do they manage that situation? While our organizations are transparency, accountability, and development. So they need to look at it as well to find a solution how these people can reach. So if we take this money, we send it to a country like my own country. Oh, sorry. How are they going to assure us saying it will reach, they will get a benefit of what the taxpayer money are given?
Thank you so much, Zainab. I think you're raising a very good point about, accountability. How do we make sure that we reach those who are most in need? How do we make sure that every single penny goes where it's supposed to go? So maybe Aurélie can come to that about, at least in the context of the GFF, at the country level, some of the monitoring and evaluation systems are in place to kind of safeguard that. Aurélie, can you take this question?
Yes, at the GFF level, they have what they call the result-based financing or the result-based funding. And what happened is, like, once you have that investment case or plan that you show that you really need to do these activities to address nutrition in your country and how you're going to do it, if this is approved, then the funds that are provided to you will be provided according to some results. So it's going to be on a step by step base. And once you provide the first results to show evidence that you are working on what you promise you are working, then they will disburse the rest of the funds. So they don't just give you everything at once, they follow up what you're doing, just trying to ensure that monitor that what you're doing is what you're saying you're doing. The other part is, the important thing is, with the GFF mechanism, it's not just the government. You also have civil society organizations, the organizations like Oyemi was talking about, and even probably Zainab's organization. And the importance of having those civil society organizations is that they can work on ensuring accountability at the country level, because they are the extra eyes, the extra arms. They are the ones who can see, oh, the money that you said you are using for nutrition, you are not using it for nutrition, you're using it for COVID. And they start blowing a whistle. When they start making noise and bringing attention or visibility to a situation, it goes back to the funders or maybe to the GFF secretariat, and an alarm is raised where they said, okay, we investigate and we look into it. So if we don't have civil society who knows the best of who wants the best for their communities, watching what is happening, and talking about what is happening and bringing that watchdog role, we won't be able to ensure and monitor or ensure accountability. So is everybody's is needed in this situation. Civil society, Zainab's organization, mine, Oyeyemi's, everybody, every citizen or community member who sees this is what is happening, then you bring attention to it. And like Oyeyemi also, her organization did with the scorecards, they were able to bring attention to what was happening and where the funding was going. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aurélie. So many good points here. And I like how you said that it's everyone's responsibility. So, that's the first action that we can take, like feeling responsible for, and, having that watchdog role. There's another question in the chat. Has any international organization yet recognized this as a malnutrition crisis? Which international organization is paying attention to this crisis? Maybe Cecilia, can you maybe talk a little bit about which organizations are kind of like coordinating the response to this malnutrition crisis?
Sure. Certainly in the international nutrition space, everyone's very aware of this malnutrition crises. And these numbers that our organization has developed have been used by many, many advocacy organizations. So it ranges Nutrition International, the Canadian government is using these numbers, UNICEF, WHO, Save the Children. There's many, many organizations using this. But what we're trying to do is reach outside the nutrition community, because I think we've all been talking about it impacts economics, it impacts education, it impacts food systems. So it's really multidisciplinary, and we need to make sure that other areas besides nutrition know about this crisis? I think that's a very good question.
Agreed. And then another comment also from Eugene in the chat. From the US, with the Seattle Results Group, we're currently advocating in support of the Global Malnutrition Prevention and Treatment Act, which oversees the work of USAID in several areas relating to nutrition, especially supporting vitamins, breastfeeding, and emergency therapy. How does Canada oversee its own foreign aid assistance? So this is a follow-up to Masaray's comments. Chris Dentis, could I put you on the spot here?
If you feel you must, then yes, of course, you can always put me on the spot. Hi, everybody. I'm Chris. I'm really here as an observer and an admirer of all the amazing work that's being done, but I'm also the executive director of Results Canada. I mean, there's so many aid accountability sort of frameworks existing within Canada in terms of oversight within the department and also just oversight, obviously, within Parliament. In terms of aid accountability, there's audits of programs that are undergone often and frequently. I'm sure Ramina, working at UNICEF, knows firsthand the reality of those and others that have worked in implementing organizations. But I think the real key to accountability was beautifully said by Aurélie, which is, you know, when we advocate at Results for investments in global mechanisms, multilateral or other big NGOs, we're always advocating for civil society engagement on the ground. That's the best vaccine against any either corruption or in just ensuring, frankly, that the resources are flowing in the direction where they'll have the biggest impact for the poorest populations and don't get sort of sidetracked along the way. But maybe since I have the opportunity of the mic, I did have a question actually. One of the things that I'm always that I was intrigued by recently was an announcement of a collaboration between, I think, Gavi and the Scaling Up Nutrition movement about integrating immunization programs for kids alongside nutrition monitoring and intervention and programs like that. And one of the things that Results Canada has advocated for and certainly been a part of in the past was something called the Muskoka Initiative, which was talked about an integrated basket of interventions delivered by community health workers, you know, in remote communities to really get at the things that you know, curb child health and lead to child deaths and maternal health and all of those sorts of pieces through a really community health-based approach. And I'm just wondering about the integration model at addressing some of these issues, and would love to hear from any of the panelists on how, given that there's one child that faces all these insurmountable sort of obstacles, how we can better, or how we already are integrating programs so that we're, you know, addressing a multiplicity of issues that kids face and not just one sort of challenge. Over.
Thank you, Chris. And I think that's a very good question. And you talked about it a little bit, Aurélie, when you said, you know, it's also about, or Cecilia, where you said, it's not just about nutrition that we're talking about, it's about education, it's about many things. So maybe do you want to elaborate a little bit more about that, about the cross-cutting aspect?
If you're asking me, sure. And I would, I agree with you completely. I think there's a real need to integrate those. There's emerging evidence. We're finding more and more about children who are malnourished, it impacts their ability to mount the kind of immunity from the vaccines that we certainly want to see. And they're more vulnerable to COVID. So there's, I don't know if you're talking generally about vaccines or vaccines for COVID, but in any case, it makes sense that you're dealing with a whole child and that work is integrated. And that's something very much the scientific community supports. I'm interested how other people in other countries are seeing it work in their communities and their countries.
Yeah, I can raise because like I have 5 projects I'm working with. Just like Cecilia, you said about we have more than, let me say, Sierra Leone is a sports country. We are a lot of minerals, countries coming in and out, but because of this corruption, it's only stuck. Few days ago, me too, I felt hot, especially when you get something like me. I work every day. I don't have no support, even though my organization registered. When they get the money, they give it to different organizations. And these organizations have been like feeding, the one that you have been calling. They are in the country, but they just buying big cars, running around the streets, leaving the children. Let me come how we do ours. We call it participatory development with farmers. They do garden. This garden they pick the plantation after a harvest. Right now, as I'm speaking to you, they are doing harvesting. So that one, the fruits, all those, the parents, the mothers cook. They take, well, like we don't have chemical to say this, we don't have it. So they use their own plantation. We supply them the seeds, the parents cook. So that's the way we do. But if like these big ones, it happens, it's a big problem. So this is the thing. They need to look to these small organizations, accountable like we can. But if they just put it to the big Alejobi, especially my country, Sierra Leone, we are struggling here. And while the how they call, the presidents and their wives, anyway, I'm going to stand for my people 2022, 2023. Women, watch out, follow us.
Hey, Anna, I don't know if I can just add to Christina's question. To me, I think it will be important to go with solutions or programs that would start with providing results based on a socio-ecological model. So we start by understanding the problem at the individual level. Is it that the person doesn't know about vaccination, or the person doesn't know, has knowledge about nutrition? At the community level, is it that the family is against vaccination? Is it the peer pressure? At the environment level, is it that we need policies to facilitate immunization in some schools, or nutrition, food for education project, or stuff like that? We have to start looking at solutions in a holistic manner, looking at every aspect of it. And if a donor is only interested in one aspect, Gavi might be interested in immunization. There is no harm in collaborating with someone else who is interested in the nutrition part, and maybe bringing those two together. I've worked in a maternal health project where we have one side of the donors interested in the policy change of the problem, where they're trying to impact changes at the policy level, while other donor is more interested in job aids, developing the job aids for the same maternal issue. So the combination of the two addresses the same problem in different ways. And in that way, I'm not an expert, but I think it could help, bring those programs together, like you mentioned the project that, about Gavi and nutrition. I just thought to share that.
Thank you, Aurélie. And there's a similar question from Rochelle in the chat. Like, speaking about integration of issues, do you have any analysis on potential long-term impacts and costs of the climate crisis on food security? On food security. Maybe Cecilia, is there research on that you can share with us?
I'm not aware of it, but it's not really my area of expertise. It's certainly something that is being looked at. It's a little harder to estimate, but it's certainly an important issue and a good question.
Yes, and I agree with Rochelle that in addition to COVID being one of the drivers of malnutrition, climate, the climate change, especially now just after COP26 is an issue that we need to look at very closely as well.
I would add conflict as a third cause.
This is-
Conflict, climate change, and COVID.
I'm just looking if there are any other questions in the chat. Do also feel free to just unmute and speak. Okay. I think we can maybe move on to our next speaker, Ramina, who can, help us take additional meaningful action together tonight. So, with our speakers, we've seen the different ways of taking action on ending malnutrition. And here, as Results Canada, we collaborate with other allies to amplify shared asks, so to make sure that our companies are successful. And UNICEF Canada is launching a 4-week advocacy campaign from November 9, to December 7. So leading up to the Nutrition for Growth Summit to showcase public support for nutrition. So as part of this campaign, UNICEF is creating a letter that you can send to the Minister of International Development. And it's a letter that calls for increased support and funding towards nutrition at N4G. So Ramina can share more. Can you share more about the campaign and the letter to us?
Yes, for sure. Thank you, Hannah, and thank you to everyone else for their insightful and important presentations. And to start and to reiterate my colleagues, but without repeating too much, I'm sure everyone here is aware at this point that the growing malnutrition crisis is a once-in-a-generation threat, and it's reversed decades of progress. However, it rarely makes the news. This is, to not reiterate my colleagues too much, but there is an opportunity for Canada to make an impact, to be able to reverse the malnutrition crisis. Change is possible with the right type of commitments and investments, and there is a precedent for Canada to act swiftly. Over the past 2 decades, the world has actually reduced the proportion of children suffering from undernutrition by 1/3, or approximately 55 million. This proves that progress is possible. Yet, growing poverty, inequality, conflict, and climate change and COVID-19 are stalling and subverting the progress that has been made in recent years. More than ever, the world needs champions such as Canada to ensure that nutrition is prioritized within its international development agenda. Canada can and must continue to build on its nutrition commitments to ensure that we have the resources, skills, and most importantly, the political will to drive greater action towards ending malnutrition. With investments and collaboration, Canada can and must take these solutions to scale. And as Hannah mentioned, in just a few weeks, from December 7th to 8th, the Government of Canada will be at the Nutrition for Growth Summit, which is a historic opportunity for global leaders, including Canada, to come together and drive greater action towards ending the malnutrition crisis and ensure everyone, everywhere can reach their full potential. But with that being said, we need your help and the help of all Canadians to advocate to the Government of Canada to make a bold new pledge to fight the malnutrition crisis at N4G. Increased commitments from Canada and other global leaders will enable life-saving nutrition programming to reach the most vulnerable populations who currently don't have access to nutritious food and nutrition services. Now, I want to take a moment to talk to everyone about UNICEF Canada's recent launch of its nutrition advocacy campaign. So a coalition of Canadian civil society organizations, including Results, including UNICEF, for a total of 13 Canadian CSOs have come together to support the global fight against malnutrition. We know that there is power in numbers and powers in unity, and we're asking Canadians to stand with us in solidarity and call for strong immediate action from Canada by demonstrating to the government that Canadians believe that Canada is a global leader and therefore has a role to play in addressing the global malnutrition crisis. So I'll pause there and I will share my screen. Okay, great. So as everyone can see here, hopefully, if you go to unicef.ca/malnutrition crisis, it will take you to this landing page here where it gives a brief background on what the malnutrition crisis is and why it's important for Canada to take action now. And so you'll see here all the lists of Canadian organizations that have signed on to in support of this campaign and in support of this letter. So all you have to do is you can, at the side of the page, you go here, you can put your first name, put your last name, and put your, I'll use my UNICEF email. You put your email, and then you can view the letter. So this letter, you can't edit it. It's laid out already. And you can see who the letter here is supported by. It just lays out, again, the scale of this malnutrition crisis and once in a generation threat. And we represent a cross section of voices across Canadian civil society, nonprofits, international organizations, and activists, just calling on the government to mobilize new commitments and new ambitions for a world without malnutrition, specifically at the 2021 N4G summit. And this letter will be sent to Minister Harjit Sajjan, who's the Minister of International Development. You can just press send. It'll take you to a page. You're able to share it with friends, share it on Facebook, family, social media. All the messaging is laid out here. And we know that the more Canadians demonstrate that they care about nutrition and ending the malnutrition crisis, the more that Canada will pay attention, and it will lay a stronger precedent for them to make a bigger commitment at N4G and following that as well. So stop sharing if I can.
Thank you so much, Amina.
Okay.
This is certainly an action that all of us can take after reading the letter. But maybe as we finish, if Oyemi, you've joined us all the way from Nigeria, if you have any final thoughts to share, any final words you want to share with us.
Okay, thank you so very much, Anna. And I want to say a big thank you to everyone on the call. Definitely, it's apparent that the issue of malnutrition is actually huge in your heart, and that's why you're here. A big thank you to Canada, and we are definitely counting on Canada to not to relent and to be at the forefront of, ending malnutrition globally. So on my final notes, and it will just be to add to a particular point raised earlier in terms of holistic approach to solving identified issues alongside nutrition. And then I would say definitely I'm a promoter of holistic intervention. I definitely believe that no intervention should be done in isolation. I believe in collaborations. I believe in actually integrating solutions to meet multiple issues. And I believe that especially for the developing countries, and I believe we should work even for developed countries, primary health care system is actually the way to go. They are the closest to the community. And they easily identify issues, and they are the first point of call. And so if primary health care system is strengthened anywhere in the world, it would definitely help in solving issues, talk about immunization issues, talk about malnutrition issues, talk about issues especially for children and as well as adolescents or the lifelong issues. Primary healthcare system is actually the way to go. Thank you everyone for having me. It's been a beautiful conversation, and I hope to see you tomorrow at the other panel program. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Oyemi. I think we're going to close on these wise words. Primary healthcare is the way to go. That's what you said, and we agree. So thank you all for participating, for taking action with us. The countdown to the Nutrition for Growth Summit is on. Let's all continue taking action to call on Canada to step up and do its part in ending malnutrition. For now, good night. And as we end this discussion here, we can continue the conversation online. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Anna, do you want some sort of screenshot? Maybe with the participants, like the panelists?
It's too late, eh?
If you're still there, I'm not sure if Hannah's gone, but we could definitely grab one. She's here.
Maybe we can grab something now, Laura.
Yeah, I'll just grab something now. Yeah. For the people that are remaining, if someone would like, or if any of you would like to turn your video on, we'll take a picture and we'll share it on social media tomorrow. Okay. Thanks for turning your video on. Okay, I'm taking it now. 3, 2, 1. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura, for remembering.
It's okay.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much, Ophelia. Thank you so much, everyone.
Have a good night.
Bye, thank you. Have a good night. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.